Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first focus session of the semester. I'm Luis. You guys already met me today in lecture and lab. So today I'm going to basically cover a little bit about the participation, kind of how it works, what these focus sessions are, how our exam reviews are going to go, and I'll talk a little bit about the endocrine unit, especially some of the key points or things I've seen students struggle with. So general info, what are focus sessions? So I started focus sessions back in 2024, 2025. Essentially what was happening was, especially early in the semester, we'd get students who would take their exams and they would miss a lot of the same questions. Um, and they were questions that weren't necessarily difficult. They were part of like the key part of the lecture or the unit. Um, for example, like the hormones, right? This is endocrine. You need to be able to know hormones, where they're secreted, where they're produced, where they act, what organs are involved, what are the effects, that kind of thing. If people were just not studying that stuff, and I think um, what I realized was, there's a lot of information which you've already seen, and they were just focusing in on the wrong things when you compare to the grand scheme of an exam. So as we get closer to the exam, Dr. Curley will release an announcement that has the breakdown of the exam. And you'll see, in previous cases where it's like, out of 50 points or 50 questions, 20 are on endocrine and functions, hormones, secretions, where they're produced, that kind of thing. And so when you look at that list, people are really focusing in on maybe 3 to 5 of the questions on the exam, and we're leaving or not looking more at the bigger chunk of the exam, and that's where they were struggling. So for me, when I created these sessions, it was to help guide you to essentially focus your studying or your study habits to really focus on these big topics. And then, as we get closer to the exam, then you can spend a little time on these other topics. If you miss the 1 point or 2 point question, at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily matter. But if you're not looking at, in this case, the hormones, and you're hoping that you're not going to get a lot of hormone questions, that's just not preparing yourself and not setting yourself up for success. So that's where these sessions come from. This semester, we're doing things a little different. Dr. Curley and I are working together to do participation points. And so what's going to happen is I'm going to host exam reviews every other week, or essentially the week of the exam. So if you've looked at your syllabus, you'll see that exam number one for endocrine is next Thursday. It's in person. It's going to be in the lab room. So that's really coming up for us, right? So you really have 9 days, really 8 days to study, and then 9 days for the exam. So I'm going to be doing the exam reviews on the Tuesday before the exam. So in our case, I'll be doing it next Tuesday. For the purposes of attendance, Dr. Curley is going to have attendance activities that she's going to sprinkle in throughout the semester. She's not going to announce them. You're not going to know what weeks or what days are the attendance or participation days. They're just going to happen. You're going to show up, you're going to get an activity, and you'll realize, oh, this was actually 4 points. We understand that not everyone's going to make every lecture or every class. We hope that you do, but we understand it's not going to happen. So to help you make up for those points, um, if you attend 5 of my 7 exam reviews, either in person after lab or via recording that I'll make for you, and you feed me back some of the study guide questions, I will essentially uh, count that as a makeup assignment for your attendance. Um, there's 50 points total for attendance. So if you get your 5 reviews, you can make up to 25 points or half of the attendance grade. So again, this is something that's going to help you, especially if you have to miss lecture for a few days. Last semester we had a large number of students that had to take the HESI right during our lecture grade or our lecture days, so they had to miss some lecture. Um, so this is going to help you, one, prepare for the final exam, but two, if you do miss the attendance days or participation days, you're able to make up those points and you can get full credit for it. Excuse me. My throat's been very itchy all day, so I hope I'm not getting sick, but I did just travel. Um, so hopefully that's not the case. Um, these exam reviews, like I mentioned, you can do them in person or via my YouTube recordings. Um, the in-person and YouTube recordings will be the same. You're going to get the same information. The only difference is if you're attending in person, once we do the exam review portion, we're going to work on a few of the study guide questions. So Dr. Curley does have an exam study guide for every module or every unit. And we're going to get you started on the exam study guide together and while we're in there. If you're attending online, again, I understand that some of you can't stay after a lecture or after lab. You have, you know, work, you've got other classes, you got responsibilities. I work full time, I get it. So you're going to be able to watch a recording of the exam review, and then you are going to select three questions in this study guide, or I might select those three and let you guys know. And you just fill those out for me. You send them to me, um, and then I will count that as you attending the exam review, if you will. Um, in total, I'm going to try to keep the exam reviews no more than 45 minutes. Typically, what I've seen is 30 minutes is usually enough. I'll spend about 20 minutes actually doing the exam review, and then we'll spend the last 10 minutes doing the study guide questions. And again, Dr. Curley prepared this study guide based on what's going to be on her exam. And so if you're like, oh, I don't know what's going to be on the exam, how am I going to prepare for this? Um, Even today, I would probably just print off the study guide now and start filling out those questions, especially as we go through lecture. That way you can start building your study guide now, and you're not trying to piece it all together towards the deadline or as we get closer to the exam. And if you have any questions about this, let me know. I'll clarify it again next Tuesday. Um, and again, it shouldn't be too bad. Last last group, everyone got participation grade points. As long as you're in class or you do these exam reviews, again, 5 sessions out of the 7, and we have 15 weeks of class. So it's only about a third of the time that you have to stay a little bit extra to do these. So if you're asking yourself, wait, there's an exam study guide. There is an exam study guide. You can find it by going under modules, Unit 1, Endocrine System, and then you go to study links for the endocrine system, and you'll see a download the endocrine lecture exam study guide. And you'll see these study guides for every unit that we have. Okay, so I'm going to go into just some generic endocrine system stuff. Today we did that chart, and Dr. Curley had you draw out those concept maps. Um, it didn't have to be perfect today. The reason we have you do that is, again, something that we've learned is when you look at something like that table, there is a lot of information. Um, it is sometimes a little too difficult to see. When I want to prepare for an exam or look at notes, I like to be able to have something personally on one page that I can quickly glance over in 5 to 10 minutes, where it makes sense, but I'm also able to like understand it to where I'm not just cramming before I go into an exam. So today was our first attempt to help you create that table, that concept map, that drawing, whatever's going to help you get on the exam, do well on the exam. And I'll show you my example here in a few slides. So one of the things that you need to know for this exam is understand the glands of the endocrine system. The endocrine system is a whole body system. And what that means is that other organs in our body that have other functions also contribute to the endocrine system. So things like the hypothalamus, it has its other functions, but it also helps with the production of some hormones. The pituitary glands, they again have other functions and they also release hormones. Things like the thyroid, things like our gonads, other things on this list. those organs are key organs to know um, for the endocrine system. Questions you could kind of get phrased. Think about things like, what are some of the, name four or three organs that are in the endocrine system? Or more specifically, again, this kind of goes back to some of our key points, is if I give you a hormone, or if Dr. Curley asks you for a hormone on the test, you need to be able to say, like, that hormone is going to go from this point to this point through the blood system. It's going to hit to attack, go to this organ, and it's going to tell this organ to do this specific thing. And again, I have an example about this later. This image is in your notes, but this is one way you could categorize your hormones by grouping them based on the organ that is responsible for either producing them or secreting them, or that are acted on them. Okay, so what is the hypothalamo-hypophyseal system? So this, again, I wasn't here last week, so you might have already discussed this. This is something that I've seen students struggle with as well. When we talk about hormones, hormones are um, how do I say this? Hormones can take different shapes and can serve different functions. So when you think about a hormone, you might think, oh, a hormone is a protein, or it's a fat, or it's a neurotransmitter. It could sometimes be all of the above. So when you look at the hypothalamo-hypophyseal system, this is discussing the hypothalamus and how it regulates and sends out hormones to either the posterior pituitary gland or the anterior pituitary gland. So when you break down the hypothalamo-hypophyseal system, there's really two, let's say two roads or two pathways that these hormones could take. One is the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract system, and the other one is the portal system. The track system, if you think about tracks, think about how people are typically running on like a track. The track system is a set of neurons that will deliver neurotransmitters or neurohormones from the hypothalamus into the posterior pituitary gland. These hormones, like ADH and oxytocin, are both neurotransmitters, but also hormones. And so those neurotransmitters get released by the hypothalamus. Hopefully you can see my mouse, and they can quickly go into the posterior pituitary gland, and they will circulate in these blood vessels until the body needs them. There are certain hormones that are secreted and immediately go to where they need to go and they perform their function. There are other hormones that get released to tell other organs or other parts of the body to create other hormones to then go do those other functions. We typically call those inhibiting and releasing hormones. Those are primarily secreted to the anterior pituitary gland, and then the anterior pituitary will then make its own hormones to then go carry out the functions that it's being told to do. And again, I'll show an example here on the next slide. Biggest thing to remember, the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract system is hypothalamus to the posterior pituitary gland, because that is basically a nervous system, or it is um, has neural pathways. We also call it the neural hypophysis because it's neural, it's the neurons, it sends those hormones slash neurotransmitters directly from the hypothalamus to the posterior pituitary gland. The hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system, that is the communication between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland. Now, when you think about portals, in biology or in anatomy, we typically talk about our portals as uh, pathways or fluid systems that help get things from one part of the body to another. In our case, it's mostly our blood system, or a cardiovascular system. And so what will happen is the hypothalamus will secrete these hormones. I'm going to have those on the next slide, but hopefully you've already know which hormones that we're talking about. They'll secrete it into this portal system. And then those will flow into the adenohypophysis or the anterior pituitary gland. And when they circulate in there, it causes the anterior pituitary to make new hormones that are going to do the job that the hypothalamus wants it to do. So those hormones that go from the hypothalamus into the anterior pituitary, that's that loop right there. That's one small communication loop. And then the anterior pituitary gland will make its own hormones and then send those out. On the pituitary gland side, those hormones go from the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland, and those same hormones will then get released into the body when the body needs them. Another difference between the two is that the pituitary hormones are typically a little faster. And what I mean by that is that they are used as needed. So when the body needs them, the body will call for them and immediately use them. On the adenohypophysis side or the anterior pituitary side, those hormones will circulate in the anterior pituitary gland. It'll start producing those hormones. So the reaction is sometimes a little slower than what you might get on the nervous system or even on the posterior pituitary side. And Dr. Curley will cover this more, especially when we talk about like breastfeeding. Breast milk isn't just produced and just isn't just stored there for you. The actual act of um, the sucking on the nipple, that is actually what triggers uh, oxytocin to then release, to then start getting the milk production going, and then getting the milk released at that time. But without that action, there's actually no production of breast milk at that time. So it's a very interesting thing. It gives it to you. You might think that it's like produced and just waiting there for the baby. It's not. The baby actually sucking on the breast will actually start the release, the production and the release of the milk at the same time. So it's very, again, very interesting. Okay, so put it together in your own way. So this is kind of where I discussed different ways you can break it down. I gave you one example where you had the different organs, and then you put the hormones where they line up. The way I did it was I like roads, I like driving, and so I like to know where I'm starting and where I'm finishing. And when I get to the end, what am I actually doing? So the way I group these is the hormones in orange are all produced by the hypothalamus. And but you see that only two of them will then go to the posterior pituitary gland. In this case, ADH or vasopressin. You might also have heard of vasopressin. ADH and vasopressin are basically the same thing. And then oxytocin. They'll go to the posterior pituitary gland, and then once they're there, they will then be secreted by the posterior pituitary gland to go where it needs to go to trigger certain functions. So I'll use ADH as an example. ADH is produced by the hypothalamus. It is then secreted by the posterior pituitary gland or the neurohypophysis. It will then act on the kidney to cause water retention. So again, where did this hormone give birth, or where did this hormone start? Where did it go next? When it got there, what happened? In this case, that hormone just waits. And once the kidney needs it, or once your body needs to retain water, it immediately gets released, goes to the kidney and tells the kidney, I need you to retain water. Fairly simple. On the other side, uh, these green, I had these seven hormones are are produced and secreted by the hypothalamus. They go and act on the anterior pituitary gland, but then the anterior pituitary gland does not release those same hormones into the body. It makes its own hormones to then release into the body to do the functions. Um, Something like I mentioned earlier. So if I have something like prolactin release hormone, that gets secreted. Um, sorry, I'll start going. It gets secreted, produced by the hypothalamus, secreted by the hypothalamus. It'll act on the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary will then make prolactin hormone, and the prolactin hormone will then be released and it'll act on the mammary glands to start breast milk production. Ideally, what you should be able to do before we get to the exam is I give you a hormone and you're like, okay, that is made, that is produced here, that is secreted here, that acts on this. And then when it gets there, what else happens? If it's one of these two, ADH and oxytocin, they go to the posterior pituitary gland, they wait, and then they go act on the kidneys or the gonads. If it's the anterior pituitary glands, those will uh, go from the hypothalamus, get secreted by the hypothalamus, go act on the anterior pituitary gland, but then the anterior pituitary gland is not going to secrete those. It's going to make its own hormones that are going to go do other things. Um, Try to bridge it together like this. You can kind of see here that, I made this as a student. So I had a typo here. So this I put glycogen for the pancreas. It's actually glucagon. And then just like a one sentence or maybe two word little thing for me to understand, that's what that does. Um, Again, I believe 18, I think maybe 18 to 20 something questions on this exam are going to be basically the questions I told you. Where's this hormone secreted? Where does this hormone act? What does this hormone do? That kind of thing. So if you can piece together in your head this, in my opinion, this is where it starts, this is where it goes, this is what it does here, this will then go do this other thing, and then the ultimate result will be this. You should be okay. If you have concept maps or things you're testing out and you're not really sure, you can also message me. Just shoot me a snapshot of whatever you're working on, and I can give you some tips like I did in class today. Feel free to use this if you want to take a snapshot as an idea. Just know that I created this so I can regurgitate and understand what's in here. If you're looking at this and you're not really quite understanding, then I would suggest you take my concept map and change it to fit your needs so that you can prepare for the exam. Okay, that's all I have for you today. Again, I didn't want to make this be very long. I just wanted to give like a general introduction as to how these focus sessions and exam reviews are going to go. And also just kind of set you up for success now. Start thinking, how are you going to remember the hormones list that Dr. Curley gave? If you look at my list, some of these hormones uh, may not be on your list, or you might have additional hormones on your list. Dr. Curley has changed this list since I started as a student. So just because you see it on here doesn't mean that these are the ones you need to know. Follow the list that Dr. Curley has in her notes. And always, if you see something in here that you're like, oh, Dr. Curley wrote it a little bit differently, I always tell you that the notes, especially her notes, are what you should follow. Again, she's making the exam, so she's making the questions, and they're going to be based on her notes. I try to take her notes and then say things maybe a little bit differently or expand on them in a different way so that hopefully with the way she explains it in class and with the way I might explain it a little differently, you sort of start piecing the bridges for yourself to understand the course content. But again, thank you very much for joining. Reach out if you have any questions. Other than that, good luck on Thursday, and I'll see you next week. Have a good night.